Marvin, thanks so much for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Pleasure.
You've been trying cases now, I assume, for probably about 60 years, right? Why law? Why criminal law?
It's just the excitement. It started with the excitement, and it just kept going. I enjoy every day of it. You get at the end of this, it's not like you're going to get a check from an insurance company, but you're going to get some pleasure out of seeing a defendant walk out of court.
How has New York City changed over the years and decades that you've been doing this in terms of the criminal justice system, let's say?
I think the biggest change is the change in the judiciary, because now it's you got to protect yourself first, and then you worry about the defendant. In other words, you don't want to be on the front page of the New York Post with the label "junk justice."
Is that because the ethics rules or the way the legal system works or the way that lawyers are governed?
I think it's because everybody's looking to protect themselves first, and the some people are worried about bad press. They're afraid, even though a person's constitutional rights may be violated, they're afraid to cut the guy loose simply because they're going to be criticized. How many judges have been criticized for dismissing cases because the DA's office hasn't been ready? And then the guy goes out and commits another crime. It wasn't the judge's fault. It was the DA's fault for not being ready. The judge had to do it. But there are times that the judge doesn't do it either because he doesn't want to be that headline, so to speak. That's the big change.
Prosecutorial misconduct is one of those phrases that's thrown around all the time, and it means very different things to different people. In the years that you've been doing this, have you seen prosecutorial misconduct in terms of volume go up, go down? Has it become more or less severe over the years?
Go up. It's become as opposed to a search for the truth or justice, if you will, it's become a contest between the district attorney and the defense counsel. The DA wants to put the guy in, irrespective of whether or not he deserves the punishment that they're asking for, and the defense counsel wants to keep him out. It's become a contest, and so many times the DA's office, even though they don't like to admit it, promotions are based upon success in a courtroom. And success in a courtroom sometimes means you got to cut the edge, so to speak.
The way the system is supposed to work is there's supposed to be an adversarial system of justice, right? Where one party fights for their goals and the other fights for their goals. And
then but you use the term there that you can't overlook, justice. And that's the term, justice for whom? Justice for the victim, justice for the defendant, justice for the system itself.
Are less cases being tried these days than in the 80s and the 90s? And if so, why?
I think less cases are being tried because you have more cases and you don't have the courtrooms nor the personnel to try the additional cases. So you wind up with dispositions that you wouldn't have gotten earlier simply because you had more room, so to speak, to try the case.
How problematic is that trial lawyers are getting less trial work in, and therefore their experience is dwindling, right? And it becomes kind of a path to go down.
Let me tell you something about trial lawyers, okay? Trial lawyers still get paid if there's a disposition in the case also, all right? There's an old saying that a friend of mine had, trial prevention is better than trial preparation.
What does it take to be a good trial lawyer?
Guts, sometimes. You're going to be criticized, sometimes from the public or friends of yours. How do you represent an innocent man or a guilty man, if you will? Why do you do what you do? How do you feel putting the guy out on the street? If you're prepared to defend yourself sometimes when you really don't have to, then go ahead and do it because you're going to enjoy it.
How do you answer those questions that you get at cocktail parties, that I get at cocktail parties, that we all get about representing guilty people and sleeping with yourself and all those kinds of things?
That one's easy. The man is presumed innocent. He's not guilty till a jury says he's guilty. And under our system of law, which is the best, he is entitled to walk if they can't prove him guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. That's our law. And he's got a right to defend himself. And nobody says when a jury comes in, the verdict is not innocent. It's not guilty. There's a difference between being innocent in the commission of a crime and not guilty for committing the crime.
You've been involved in your fair share of media heavy cases. What's the hardest part of trying a high profile case?
I guess stopping the phone from ringing at night when they're calling you and everybody wants a quote. But honestly, it's just that there really isn't much of a difference between trying a high profile case or not a high profile case. Really isn't. Because you're going to do your trial preparation regardless. You're going to interview your witness regardless. The press is not going to be there. The only thing is you're going to be getting more telephone calls. What's going on? Give us a quote, etc. Or explain to us why you did what you did. If you don't want to answer it, you just don't pick up the phone. Then it becomes exactly the same way as trying the everyday man in the street.
Are things like jury sequestration, motions to move venue, are those important mechanisms in the law? Do they work? Are they useful? Are they commonly used?
Well, change of venue is a very strange thing. I mean, first of all, you got a big difference between Manhattan and Queens, so to speak. In Queens, the second department, the law says you got to try to pick a jury first. And if you can't pick a jury, then come to the appellate division. Show us you can't pick a jury, and they'll change venue. In Manhattan, you can make the first department, you can make a motion directly before you start the trial for change of venue. So you have different rules within the city of New York, so to speak, with respect to change of venue. And it's not easy to get. There was a change of venue we had in the case involving a police officers who were alleged to have shot an individual, killed him. They got a change of venue. The president, I shouldn't say the president, the former president, couldn't get a change of venue in his case in Manhattan. It's just different rules.
You were involved in litigation back in the 80s with NBC challenging a judge's ruling preventing lawyers from speaking to the press. You know that there are ethics rules around what lawyers can say to the press. Why was that important for you to do? It was a case involving Floyd Abrams and ABC.
You sure? Well, which case? I don't know. Honestly, I don't remember that one.
Do you worry about talking to the press and getting in trouble for it?
Not at all. Not in the least. As a matter of fact, the worst part about people not being able to talk to the press is when the press hangs a bad one on the judiciary. They're not allowed to respond themselves personally. Therefore, it makes it more difficult for me in the next case because OCA has to respond for them. They should be allowed to respond for themselves. And if they were allowed to respond for themselves, it would make it easier for them to do what they did to cause the public ire, so to speak, to do it again in my case, in a case that I represent the defendant.
Do celebrity defendants, folks involved in high-profile cases, suffer or benefit from that environment?
Well, depending upon the result and what they're charged with, depends upon whether they're going to suffer or not suffer. If they're charged with assaulting the next door neighbor, they're not going to suffer from it. If they're charged with abusing a child, or they're charged with abusing their wife, or they're charged with the use of drugs, they'll suffer from it. It depends upon the case and the circumstances.
Are cameras in the courtroom a good idea?
Yes,
How
absolutely. The public should see what goes on in the court. They have a right to know.
the argument is such that when the media gets involved and when cameras get involved, the actors involved in these cases tend to play to those cameras. Have you seen something like that happen? Do you think it matters?
After about 2 minutes, you forget that there's a camera in the courtroom. I've been in courtrooms with cameras. You start, the trial starts, the evidence starts going in. You don't even know there's a camera there. Believe me, that's just something that's been made up by somebody who's never had the experience of being in a courtroom or having cameras in a courtroom. Nobody plays. You don't play to the press, or you don't play to the camera. You play to that jury, those 12 people sitting there. The press is not going to free you or free your client. It's those 12 guys that are sitting there, or 12 women, or a combination of both.
You obviously, your reputation was built, I guess, to some degree back in the day on representing police officer defendants. You told New York Magazine back in '99 that in that environment back then, it was difficult to be a police officer defendant. Has that changed?
It's become more difficult. It's become more difficult to represent the police officer because there are times years ago, I shouldn't say times, but years ago, the public respected the police officers. If a police officer told a kid to go home, that kid would go home. I'm talking about a while ago. It doesn't happen now. Now the police officer is not respected. People talk back to him. He never knows what's going to happen when he stops a car. It's much more difficult for the police officer. And being more difficult for the police officer, you're going to have situations that are going to get out of hand. And when they get out of hand, the police officer winds up in the courtroom as a defendant. Now, I'm not talking about the guy that starts dealing drugs or something like that, but I'm talking about basically the police officer that's involved with an assault or a homicide, if you will. I mean, I've represented police officers charged with homicide as well, chokehold as well. But it's more difficult now because the police officer himself is not looked upon with the same respect as he was. Whether they brought that on themselves somehow, I don't know. But it's a fact that exists today.
Why do you think cops are attracted to you as a lawyer?
It's not only cops. I think that they feel. I've gotten police officers as clients as a result of having cross-examined those police officers in cases that I've represented defendants that they've arrested. You give a defendant a fair shot. That's all that they're looking for. I mean, somebody has referred to my office as Little Switzerland. Sometimes you'll find organized crime. Sometimes you'll find gang members, and sometimes you'll find police officers all sitting in the waiting room at the same time. When they come to me, unfortunately, they're defendants.
Do you see that in those cases there's a presumption of guilt?
I think, I think in most cases today, even though there's supposed to be a presumption of innocence, and you question the jurors on the presumption of innocence, in most cases today, I believe that the jurors feel that once somebody's been charged with the commission of a crime, they must have done something. I don't know whether you'd call it a presumption of guilt, but there's a presumption there must be something wrong here.
And this is a general question, I know every case is fact specific and every case is different. Should lawyers be looking to try cases on what they call actual innocence rather than reasonable doubt? Most defense lawyers try cases on reasonable doubt.
If you had to try a case on actual innocence, there'd be far less people acquitted today than are being acquitted. No, I'll rely on reasonable doubt rather than actual innocence.
You were never a prosecutor prior to being a defense lawyer, is that right?
That's correct.
So many defense lawyers have been prosecutors. Do you think it's important to work on that side of the aisle? Or, as some lawyers say, does it hurt because prosecutors aren't used to cross-examining witnesses often, since most defendants. Yep.
I think it hurts. I really think it hurts because I believe that unless you know how to cross-examine, you don't belong on the defense at the defense table. That's the key to your livelihood. That's the key to the acquittal of the defendant. That's the key to the representation. It's the ability to cross-examine, not to lead, because you're never going to be able to lead the people's witnesses. You want to be able to direct the people's witnesses where you want to get direct them, where you want them to go. And you can't do that if you can't cross-examine.
What does it take to be a good cross-examiner? Is it memory, eye contact, all those things you hear about, preparation?
I don't know. I don't think it's memory. I don't think it's eye contact. I think it's more of the trying to paint the picture that you want painted through the mouth of the witness. You're directing the paintbrush through the mouth of the witness.
You've done this now for so long. Has there ever been a moment where you thought, I'm going to retire, I'm going to do something else? Or is that never something that comes into your head?
Yeah, about an hour ago. No, I think the time has come when I'm getting ready to retire. Not so much that the thought of retiring, though, is not a pleasant thought. I mean, I don't know what I would do. I'm so used to doing it that at this stage of the game, I enjoy doing it. Maybe I would like to teach somebody how to do it. But other than that, it's like they said in Fiddler on the Roof, on the one hand, Reptavia, on the other hand, Reptavia. On the one hand, you're getting older. On the other hand, you're going to miss it. Which way do you go?
Have you ever thought about teaching or doing something of that sort?
I'm thinking about it now because I don't think I could keep going in a courtroom, though. It's not that I don't want to. It's just getting very tiring. Let's put it that way.
And you're not the kind of guy that'll just go to Florida and live there.
I have a place in Florida, but no, I'm not the kind of guy that wants to go to Florida and just live there. That thought bothers me also. That thought is sending me back to the courtroom.
What's the biggest benefit of being a trial lawyer for all these years in the same place, right? In that New York City, Queens courthouse. Is that something that has benefited you in some way over the years?
That's a fallacy. People tend to think that because your office is at a certain location, that's your bailiwick, so to speak. It's not. I've tried cases throughout the state of New York. I mean, the criminal law is the same in Queens County as it is in Manhattan, Brooklyn, the Bronx, and upstate New York and Onondaga County. I mean, it's exactly the same. You object with hearsay. You object with an objection that has to be raised, and you hope that the judge knows the law and follows the law. So that yes, your office is in a certain county. You may have a majority of your cases in a certain county, but you're practicing throughout that. Your lawyers practice throughout the state and throughout the city.
Have you ever tried cases or defended cases in other states?
Yes. I've defended cases in Florida, Tennessee, Jersey. I believe that's about it for out of state.
How different is that experience?
Well, you wind up being, usually what happens is you have an attorney, you have to have an attorney who's admitted in those states and in those jurisdictions to sit with you and to guide you and to help you And then the judge basically gives you permission to cross-examine or examine the witnesses. But you have to have local counsel sponsor your right to practice, so to speak, in that one case, pro hoc vice.
You've been involved, as many lawyers had been in the 80s and in the 90s, in organized crime, mob cases. Has that dwindled to the point where it's effectively non-existent? In other words, do trial lawyers not defend those cases at all anymore, or does it, to some degree, still exist in New York?
When they make the arrest, the trial lawyer represents them. If they're not making the arrests, the trial lawyer is not representing them. I've seen far fewer organized crime arrests in the last 5 to 10 years than in the 5 to 10 years preceding that. You had more lawyers representing organized crime individuals or defendants 10 years ago than you have today. But you have more organized crime cases 10 years ago than you have today. Now, are people going to say that the government or the prosecutors and law enforcement has done away with organized crime? I don't think so.
Is part of that, well, part of that is because the laws changed and new laws have been enacted over the years to deal with that. But is part of that also because the government is just getting better at doing its job in terms of the mechanisms, the evidentiary methods available, cameras, cell phones, high definition stuff? Is it harder to engage in these kinds of activities?
It's harder to defend anybody today than it was 5 years ago, so to speak. But when you talk about the government and organized crime, you have the definition of organized crime as it used to be is different than the definition of organized crime today. You had the organized crime families years ago. Now, organized crime can be any group of narcotic sellers, so to speak. Any group of narcotic individuals who are selling drugs on the streets of the city of New York. That may be considered or should be and is considered organized crime as well. When I'm referring to organized crime now, I'm referring basically to the, as the government used to call it, the mafia. You have fewer of those organized crime cases today than you had years ago. You have organized crime cases in groups of drug dealers and different groups, so to speak, but I'm not referring to it that way.
As it relates to police investigatory methods, how often or how different, rather, these days are things like stop and frisk, other things that cops perhaps were able to do more back in the day? Is there a difference at all?
Those days are gone. I think that the stop and frisk, forget about it. That's over. But what's happened was the hands of the everyday beat officer has been tied, but the hands of the investigative staff has been extended. In other words, the computers and the electronics that exist today extend the ability of the investigation at one level, but the everyday cop on the street, his hand is tied.
Let me talk to you about some other cases that are in the press these days. What do you think of all this Trump stuff?
I think the guy got a fair trial. I think he's no different than any defendant. I think the nonsense. I think he should have been. Personally, I think he should have been jailed the minute he violated the court order. And if the Secret Service wants to go spend some time at Rikers Island, be my guest. Because if he wants to invite him there, he's the one that's inviting him there by breaking the law. But I don't think he's entitled to any greater benefit than any client of mine would have. And I commend the judge, though, for his temperament in not doing what I think should have been done. because maybe that was the right thing to do under the circumstances. However, that violation still exists and will exist on June the 11th.
July.
Yeah, I'm sorry, July the 11th. You have the sentence coming on July the 11th, and then you have a sentence that could be meted out for the violation of the court orders, which could be entirely different than the sentence on the crime for the crime itself. But I don't like to see any defendant treated differently than any one of my clients. And if any one of my clients did and made those statements that were made outside of court, or talking about the judge's daughter, or talking about the judge being a crook on TV, my client would be in Rikers Island so fast his head would swim. He couldn't have enough money to make bail to come out. And there's something else that is shameful in this case. How dare a court set up an interview location outside a courtroom for a defendant to hold press interviews relative to what goes on in the courtroom right next door? How do they do something like that?
So
if everybody's supposed to be treated equal, I got a guy that would like to make some statements. Let's put a camera outside the court. It's ridiculous.
Well, you'd never let your client make statements in the middle of a trial. Let's be honest. This case is a bit different.
That's for sure. But I wouldn't be given the opportunity either. There's a difference. I wouldn't let him do it, and I wouldn't be given the opportunity if he wanted to do it. This guy wanted to do it, and he did it, and they gave him the opportunity.
Do you think he'd go to jail?
In my mind, absolutely. Absolutely. I'll give you the reasons why I think he's going to get a jail sentence. Okay? This is my personal opinion. All right? Number one, Cohn did the same thing. And Cohn is an underling, so to speak. He's not the top guy. He did 3 years for the same thing that Trump was just convicted of. That's number one. Okay? Everybody's supposed to be treated equally. Cohn cooperated. Yet he did 3 years and he got 3 years. Why should the mastermind, so to speak, of what transpired not get jail time if the underling got jail time? That's number one. Number two, this crime was committed at the desk in the White House. In the Oval Office, this crime was committed. And nothing for that? What are you gonna do? Give him probation? Is he remorseful? Does he show one bit of remorse? That's something else the judge takes into consideration. No remorse for what he did. He's still cursing out the judge. Well, there's an old saying, I don't know whether you could use this, but payback is a bitch.
You know the arguments about political prosecutions and all that kind of stuff. Is the fact that even that's an argument, that's a narrative, is the fact that that's even out there a problem?
For who?
For the public.
No, public's got no problem. The problem is what to do with a guy like that when he's convicted of a crime. For the public, the problem is, do you vote for a guy with those convictions as for president of the United States? That's the problem for the public. The legal problem is not the problem for the public. That's the judge's problem. The problem for the public is, what do they do with a guy like that?
So you view him as being above the law rather than below the law?
I view him as being treated above the law.
You saw a few weeks back, the Harvey Weinstein verdict was overturned. Were you surprised? Were you nothing at all? Did that pique your interest in some way?
Well, Was I surprised? No. The surprise was that it came in that particular case. The issue of law, though, didn't surprise me. The issue of law being the ability to use prior uncharged acts to prove that the person committed the crime in question. I think that went just a little too far. But it surprised me that it was that particular case that caused the court to come out with the new law, so to speak, with respect to prior bad acts.
Marvin, I'll let you go on this. Why are criminal defense lawyers or good criminal defense lawyers important?
Why are they important? Because you never know when you're representing the now I'm not going to use not guilty, the innocent man. You never know when that innocent man is sitting next to you. And that innocent man, it's really tough when he goes to jail and spends 15, 16, 17 years in jail until they find out that, we convicted an innocent man vis-a-vis DNA or some other scientific test now that shows that the guy was innocent. The perfect example, I'm in the middle of a case right now involving eyewitness identification. 70 some odd percent of those cases which are being reversed now because of the DNA results showing that it was the wrong man were all convicted innocent people based upon good faith eyewitness identification. It's a shame for those people. Picture spending 16, 17 years. No, you won't spend it at Rikers or spend it upstate, but picture spending 16, 17 years on Rikers Island.
It's a good way to end it. Marvin, thank you for your time. I appreciate it.